Welcome back to part 2 of the Raymond Spencer CEO Advantage podcast. In this episode, you're going to find out something really amazing. In episode 2, you're going to discover the emergence of a new industry, and Raymond was at the forefront of that industry. You're going to hear his story of discovery and of enormous business success into something that is commonplace now, but in those days was incredibly visionary. Stay with us. This is going to be great.
To cut a long story short, I ended up becoming the chairman CEO of this new entity. They had incorporated Kanbay a year or so before in Canada, which is where John was from, and Kanbay was a play on Canada and Bombay, except it was a K instead of a C.
Yeah. And you formed a view about the two A's.
I did. But neither John nor Dilip were going to do this business. Dilip was a lawyer in Bombay. John's wife was a teacher in the American International School in Delhi and was still very much part of the ICA's on the ground work there, later in Hong Kong. And I decided this was sort of really great timing for me. And so I left the ICA at the end of 1988, and we formed Kanbay in the US in February 1989 and launched Kanbay. And what drove me personally to do it, other than the fact that I had no money and I had a couple of kids who ended up living with me, 12 days a fortnight, and live with their mother every other weekend, was that I wanted to see if the leadership and I'll call them management methods that we used within the nonprofit world, where there was a heavy emphasis on what is now called organizational culture, wasn't in those days, teamwork, values-based, etc., whether that could fly in the profit-making world. And so we started the business. And Dilip, particularly, part-time helped source people, and he had a couple of ways of doing that and found people. And it's interesting, I say to people that Kanbay could not have started if the fax machine hadn't have become a commercialized household technology. Yeah. Because what would happen was they would fax over resumes from India. We would have to retype them into, and not just for formatting reasons, but because that's the only way to get the information. And then we'd take it to a potential customer. And our early customer was IBM in Austin, Texas, in their AS400 center, and a little later Wilson Sporting Goods, which was in Chicago. And another customer, Household International, which becomes a key part of the Kanbay story. And we'd take these resumes and say, hey, we got one of these or three of these or whatever we had. And that's the way the business started. Yeah. And so I was, the chairman and CEO, the head salesperson, the guy who swept the floor. It went from a one-person team to 2 or 3 or 4 quickly.
Whilst, can I just say, you were practically a single dad with 2 girls. Like that's, I was. You started this business as CEO chair. That's impressive.
With some help. I had very much the help of my now wife, who I had met later. She had lived in Venezuela during this process, during this year of 1989. She moved to Chicago. And I think at the end of the year or early 1990, I can't quite remember when, and we'll have to edit this out of this because she'll kill me if I don't remember when. We decided actually to move in together, which it wasn't that common in those days. But, I said to her, look, like it or lump it, this is a package deal. And you've got to make, you deserve to decide whether the package works. But I also had a couple of 3 young ladies from Australia come over. My sister and my brother, who I haven't mentioned till now, but I have a brother who was born when I was 16, so I basically never knew him until he was 21. My sister and brother arranged for, one at a time, young women to come and spend 6 months with us. Yeah. And they were like, they were nannies.
Nanny,
au pairs, nannies. And so yes, I had some help, but it wasn't. I get the.
I was like, wow, what a Superman! How did he do that? But okay, you had help.
Yeah.
Still a Superman.
I had help, but so we were off trying to build this business.
Yeah,
that's that's the beginning.
Yeah,
it couldn't have happened either without the support of a woman who I refer to often as my American mother. She was a fabulous lady. Her name was Henrietta Thomas, Retty Thomas. She'd grown up in a fairly wealthy family in Connecticut. In fact, her childhood home was the home of a very famous TV show, British show that I can't now remember. But and she'd married a guy by the name of Thomas, whose father had started a company called Thomas and Betts. Mm-hmm. And they lived in Mendham, which was a small community outside of New York in New Jersey on about a 100-acre estate with 3 or 4 homes on it and so on. A big house and a couple of 3 smaller houses.
Yeah.
And she was a very passionate, socially driven woman, and she got involved with ICA. And during my years in fundraising, she and I worked together raising money. And she was the first person I ever raised $1 million from. I used to stay at her house. And I should say, 6 months after her husband retired at 65, before I knew her, he died. And so she was a widow. Mm. And I'd stay in her house. She had this habit of going to bed early, getting up early. And so I would get up around 5:30, which I was quite used to anyway, and we'd drink coffee. And one morning I made this pitch for why she needed to give us $1 million, which was real money back in those days.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, she said she would. And then she and I would visit people, and she was a really good fundraiser, and she reminded me often of there's only really one basic thing when it comes to fundraising, which a lot of people forget. You've got to ask for the money. Yeah. And you got to ask for a specific amount of money.
Yeah.
Which requires homework.
Yeah.
So I knew her really well. And she was, very helpful, very supportive of me. So she lent me an amount of money, I don't remember exactly, but enough for a down payment on a 3-flat, or it was actually a 3.5-flat in Chicago. And that worked really well because I lived in one on the first floor, had tenants on the second and third floor, and their rental income more than covered the mortgage. And then we had a garden apartment, which was a small apartment, one like a studio apartment in the basement that was half a floor above the ground, that became a place where people who were coming to Kanbay in the early days would stay before they went to their first job. So this is the way this business started, very slowly. I think after a year, we maybe had 15 people working. I mean, it was very, very low margin, but we were surviving.
Yeah. And so was she your first, she loaned you some money to was she your first investor?
She was.
That helped you start to scale?
She also put, I want to say $100,000 into the firm.
Yeah.
Anyway, she ended up owning, as a result of that, about 20% of the business. Mm. Don't ask me how we calculated this, because none of us would have known how to calculate it. It was, we started out a third, and then she got 20%. So
there you go. And it's fascinating. Again, today, often, you have big corporate people who then approach not-for-profits with this idea that business can teach not-for-profits how to be better not-for-profits. And here's Raymond on the cusp of building this enormously successful organisation on a theory that is the exact reverse of that. And that is everything we learned and taught in our not-for-profit experience is going to be applied commercially. Again, swimming against the tide of convention that today, but something, of course, Raymond and I share very much in common is, having spent 20 years running a successful not-for-profit organisation and blowing awards by getting cross with people for patting me on the head, saying, "Oh, you must feel good running a not-for-profit." And I was like, man, if I was running this for-profit, you wouldn't be patting me on the head. You'd be saying, "This is fantastic." But it's Kanbay now is getting close to paying you because your
Kanbay
second investor.
Yeah, Kanbay was paying me.
Yep.
And I took a salary that was the equivalent of what I could earn as a taxi driver. Because
his first job.
Yeah.
And the reason I did that was I could always go drive a taxi.
Yeah.
Now, Paul, you know me. You don't. You know I wouldn't have driven a taxi. It would have been a limousine.
Yeah.
But I could always go do that.
Yeah.
And therefore, I wasn't putting my family at risk. I wasn't worried about failing.
Yeah.
And I wasn't putting myself of living, quote unquote, beyond my means that I couldn't sustain. So whether Kanbay worked or didn't work, it wasn't going to impact, our family lifestyle.
Yep.
And I think that was that was a very important decision, and it stayed that way until 1997.
Wow.
I mean, I gave had little raises, but I was always paying that to myself because I was concerned that I not get myself in a position where we were compromising decisions for the business based on survival. Or my own personal survival. I wasn't in this for myself only. I was in it for myself, of course, but I was in it for the broader ownership group and for every associate in the business. Which
I find that so humbling and so beautiful that you had that. Like I can imagine, and I say this from experience, one of the CEOs that I was working for several years ago, there was all of a sudden millions in funding that came into this startup. And he thought that, that's going to give me an invitation to give myself a huge salary and that was, I find a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when they receive such a big lump sum, have this, all of a sudden this mentality just switches. You're like, okay, I'm now worthy of this ridiculous high salary, which I think that's at the start of the end when they have that mentality, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true.
Yeah. I think too that there's a real success and real sustained success and successful leadership comes from a place of not being about you. And I think that the thing that you're talking about there, Raymond, is you didn't put yourself in a position where it needed to become about you.
Well, it clearly couldn't be about me because I knew nothing about software development.
Yeah, that's what you were selling. Contentless learning again.
But I knew how to find people who did.
There we go. That's your skill, yeah.
It's an enormous... So Kanbay became a very successful organisation. Give us an idea of the... I mean,
we were an overnight success, 15 years later.
That old chestnut.
I mean, to give you sort of the quick version, in a way, we were 5 companies over our life. And I won't go through each 5, but again, part of the reason I was able to remain as leader in what I hope was seen as an effective way was because what I was leading, I wasn't doing. I was creating teams of people who were fit for purpose for those during those sort of 5 eras. The first era I kind of talked about, bringing a few people from India. But we quickly I personally quickly got sick of that and saw that there wasn't going to be a way to add a lot of value.
Mm-hmm.
And so we felt that we needed to actually move more of the work to India. And so we created an alliance with a company called Square D in Madras, now Chennai. And we did a combination of work on site for customers and work in India. And our first customer that accepted our capacity to have software written in India was a company called Household International, a consumer finance company in Chicago. And we did that. And then after a couple of years, again, we felt that we weren't really doing it in the best way possible. And it was largely because the culture of our two companies was just not quite merging. It was quite different. And so we went to Household and said, look, you've seen the benefit. I probably had 20 people working in India. I mean, it was very small. But you've seen the benefit of this. Why don't we start our own? Because you've also seen the benefit of what Kanbay brings to the table. And so we worked with them, and they helped us finance our first campus, which we located in Pune, India, which is about 4 hours by car outside of Mumbai on the Deccan Plateau. And by this time, Bangalore was already very much the technology hub. And we made a conscious decision to be a big fish in a small pond versus what would have been a very small fish in the big pond where TCS, Infosys, Wipro, and by this stage other companies were swimming.
And co-investing with your client.
Yes, co-investing in the sense of they didn't own it, but they helped us fund it, and in a sense gave us advance payment on work over time. And we had to, I think Retty tipped a little bit of more money in. That's how she eventually got up to 20%. But that says it wasn't a lot. And again, we were running this business where every penny we made was going back into the business. We were not taking any money out of the business. We were reinvesting for growth. Mm-hmm. So we started our first campus. We worked with this beautiful architect in Pune, a woman and her partner, who took our values and designed the building that reflected our values. And it was round, very unusual. It had the workspaces were around the outside, and it had in the center of each floor like a village square where people could sit and talk. And she really understood the concept of building a values-based architecture that reflected the culture that we were trying to create, which was quite different than the hierarchical culture that was so common in
What were
India.
your values?
Well, we had 7.
Okay.
I'll give you 2 or 3. It's funny. One of the jokes in our company was everybody had to learn know all 7 values. And I'd walk down the hall and say value 3, and they would parrot it up. But the first one was we value respect for the individual. It's pretty obvious. Another one was we value an ownership mentality that encourages innovation and risk taking. And the 7th value is we value giving back to people and society. Mm-hmm. And for each of the values, we were about operationalizing culture. So for us, the values, once they gelled, which happened over the course of a year or so, and it was a very participatory process, they kind of got frozen. But what didn't get frozen was the behaviors that reflected the values in action. So I think of culture, I use the image of a tree for culture. So like a tree, culture has things you see and you don't see. With a tree, you see the leaves, the branches, the fruit. What you don't see is the roots and the things that nourish the tree. And so values are like roots. You don't see values. I mean, people put them on the wall, but how many times have you read values on the wall and gone and met with people and the
It's nothing like
the tree doesn't, there's no correlation. And so behaviors become, how do I manifest those values? And so for every value, we had 7. We would identify 3 behaviors that we expected of every associate. Then we would identify 3 behaviors that the associate could expect from the business. And then we had 3 taboos. And unlike the values, we would change these. Now, over a course of 15 years or so, probably 40% of the expected behavior stayed the same and 60% changed, because you'd look at where are you strong, where are we strong, where are we weak, what do we need to emphasize, and so on. And there was never a moment, like I never did any, nor our managers did any sort of public performance, so to speak, meetings where we didn't refer back to the culture in some way, shape, or form, every interaction. And after a while, we got to where once a year we'd probably spend a day as the senior leadership team of the company looking at the behaviors and trying to say, okay, what are we doing well? We don't really need to have that as a behavior we're highlighting it anymore. But what do we need to? One time our learning and development processes had fallen off, and so we injected behaviors into 2 or 3 values that demonstrated the importance of learning and development, for example. You just kept looking. So like a behavior, say for a value of we value honesty, integrity, and open and caring communication was another value. So one of the behaviors that we expected of individuals was speaking up in meetings. And this may sound obvious to an Australian, but to a young Indian 23-year-old programmer, that was very unnatural, because if your boss or your boss's boss was in the room, you didn't speak. And we wanted the inverse to be true. We wanted most of the speaking to be from the 23-year-olds. And so again, this is where ICA facilitation methods as well as culture came to play, because the way we ran meetings was we would facilitate conversations. We'd go around the room. We would facilitate brainstorming sessions where everybody was equal and everybody's insights were equal, and so on. And we would, you were encouraged to speak up. Likewise, a behavior that that every associate could expect from the company was timely feedback. That was if you like, an organizational or company manifestation of that value. And a taboo, for example, could be putting somebody down, saying something that put somebody down for what they had said. So this was so we were all about trying to operationalize the culture across what became a global entity, which is relatively easy to do when you're 100 people in one, well, we were never in one place, but within one country, and then it gets more complex. And culture was the standout distinguishing factor of our company. I mean, when we did employee surveys, the answers were always the same. Why do you stay at Kanbay? Number 1 reason, the culture. Number 2 reason was the learning and development opportunities, and the number 3 reason was the quality of work.
And this. So I'm just thinking, this is in the 90s, right?
This is the 90s, and then the early 2000s.
Like, I feel like it's still companies to this day are trying to grasp what is culture and understand that learning and development is an important part. And
oh, absolutely. And there's two parts to what Raymond's said as well, that lots of companies or organisations, whether they're commercial or not for profit, miss. They shouldn't miss it because it seems obvious when you're doing it. But what Raymond's talking about there is you see organisations with their values on the wall.
Yeah.
But if you ask them to describe the behaviours that demonstrate those values and the behaviours that don't demonstrate those values, and that if you then went around the organisation, had people be able to tell you, well, here's what that value means in my behaviour and here's what it doesn't mean in my behaviour or the way I conduct myself in meetings. It's that very obvious part of values that is often most obviously missing in organisations that fail to scale or that fail to live by those values. They've got these words, but when you don't have to scratch very hard to go, oh, they're just words.
Well, and in fact, you're better off not having them on the wall. And the whole point was those values then get infused into your systems, your processes, the policies of the organization all need to be consistent with your values. And so if you value an ownership mentality, one of the behaviors you should expect from the company is trust me when it comes to time and expense reporting. Time reporting for a business like ours was critical, right? Because that's how we got paid in the beginning, was so many dollars per hour of work.
Yeah.
But again, it was up to the individual to own that.
One of the things that your company as well, one of the ways it demonstrated its values was saying that one of the ways you weren't going to get fired.
Yes. So again, when you say you value innovation and risk-taking, an ownership mentality that encourages innovation and risk-taking, we wanted people to take risks. And so, yes, the only thing you really could be guaranteed of getting fired about in our business was a gross violation of the values.
Yeah.
And we had to do that once where a very senior person in the company violated our values. We didn't do a public execution, but we didn't need to.
Yeah.
Because him being asked to leave sent a huge message throughout the organization, because he would have been described by many as the most important person or the most indispensable person in the business. Probably set us back 6 to 18 months in some ways. But on the other hand, it made our business. But then as we got bigger and could afford it, we really institutionalized this process. We had a wonderful chief people officer called Cyprian D'Souza, who was a person from India that I met when I was, 19 and he was 17. And I've known him ever since. He's the godfather of one of my kids and so on. He left the institute a couple of years after I did, worked a bit by himself, but and consulted back to us, and then joined us full time when we had our operations in India. And he not only led the India operation, but was the global chief people officer. And so we structured this to the point where as we got bigger and we had as many people in the culture side of that organization as in the more typical HR side of the organization.
Interesting.
And they would send out talking points for every meeting, so that throughout the whole chain, I don't know how many meetings you have in a business of our size, but these were the talking points on culture for they would do training programs, and every training program both had a skill dimension and a culture dimension and an intellectual dimension. So it took a lot of work, and it was a real financial investment as we got bigger. But it was the difference, and we saw that much later in and around 2000 when Morgan Stanley chose us to be their so-called offshore partner over Infosys, TCS, and Wipro. And the reason they gave was when they visited us around the world, they met the same organization in every place. One of the values of a operationalized corporate culture is consistent, customer or stakeholder experience, but also consistent associate experience.
Yeah.
And although the employment salaries and subtleties of employment in India versus Singapore, Hong Kong versus Chicago or versus London, there are differences, but at the heart, everybody was the same.
In my 25 years as a CEO, one of the hardest things to find was a consulting and advisory firm where they'd actually been CEOs. I created CEO Advantage to be the advisory firm I was looking for. Go to ceoadvantage.com.au and find out how we can help you and your team be the best in the business. And I'm really fascinated with how you managed this part, because when an organisation becomes a public organisation and becomes listed, culture and values gets really challenged by shareholder structures and shorter term ROIs and different KPIs. And in fact, quite surprisingly, some of the drivers of being publicly listed work against the way what's made the organisation successful. Sometimes shareholder groups seem to almost work against it. When did you become publicly listed, and how did you manage the transition or to keep the culture and values alive in an environment where now different people have an influence on you?
Yeah. Well, the answer to this question begins many years before we went public.
Yeah.
We got our first serious investment from a venture fund public company called Safeguard Scientifics in 1997. And although we weren't remotely thinking about going public at that stage, that idea was forming in our minds because many companies had gone public in the Safeguard portfolio.
Yep.
And also, prior to that, a former ICA donor who was a very wealthy businessman in Minnesota had become a friend. He and his wife had come to my second wedding and so on. And in the I think 93, 94, something like that, I visited with him and had a talk about Kanbay and where it was at. And he was like a mentor or advisor, but saw him very infrequently. But he said something that challenged me. He said, you're going to have to make a fundamental decision as to what you want to be when you grow up. And, do you want to be a business that just makes a lot of money? Do you want to be a business that, his mission is to just fund the shareholders, like a boutique? Or do you want to be a globally, he used the term, do you want to be an elegant organization? And we talked about what did he mean by that? And he sort of meant by that, yes, you've got to be financially successful, of course. You've got to be able to grow, but you've got to be able to maintain your culture and do all of these things. So that helped me think. And we created, so this became firstly a motto for us. We decided, yes, we wanted to be a $1 billion globally elegant organization. Now, this is when we were probably $15 million of revenue,
Yeah.
A long way from $1 billion. But having that aspiration, because it wasn't a vision, the visions were shorter term, but this aspiration, it was like a pair of glasses through which you looked at everything, even in the moment. So if we want to be a $1 billion globally owned organization, we do this and not that.
Yep.
So that helped us. That became a mantra. We created what we called the globally elegant organization model, or the GEO model, and a framework for, typical ICA stuff. We had a framework of things. I can't remember how many elements were in that framework now. I do remember about our scalability framework was 8 elements, but I can't remember what was in that one. And that helped us make decisions and drive the business. Then in 97, as I said, we got funding. And we then had to put in place a more formal board structure. And unusual for Australia, but I was the chairman and CEO of the company. We had then one person on the board from the executive who was Cyprian, the chief people officer. And interestingly, not the CFO. who attended all the board meetings and was essentially on the board, but he wasn't literally at that point. And then 3 or 4 independents. And so
a chief people officer, though,
so
even today, that is not a role that is first order of business on a board. There's doing something vastly different than
the
everybody
core
else.
Consistency of leadership early on was the chief people officer, the chief financial officer, and myself.
Amazing.
And then people came and went, and later people, evolved, and then we got a COO later, and so on. But
so your board,
the board started to put form, into the way we operated, and that form meant, disciplines around doing what you say you're going to do financially. We had governance processes, obviously regular board meetings, but every board meeting, the board met without Cyprian and I for a period of time. They would have an executive session. And we'd always joke that it was a successful board meeting if we still had a job.
That's right.
But that's where they could talk amongst themselves, and Don Caldwell, who was the lead director, the lead non-executive director, would always give us the feedback from what happened in that session. And so to this day, whenever I have a board meeting, I always have that session. If for no other, even if there's nothing to talk about, because the time there is something to talk about, you don't want it to be a rarity.
Yes.
So we started to put in place elements of how we'd operate. And then in the 99, I met Mike Rintoul, who was a investment banker at UBS. And I met him through Don Caldwell. And he was the very opposite of the stereotypical investment banker. He does have movie star looks, but he was a gentle, very caring, very thoughtful banker, very bright. And he ran UBS's technology practice. And he gave us so much time and insight and worked for us for no money, for a couple of 3 years.
Yeah, right.
So in and around that period of time, we made the decision we would go public. And so we started this process, which we call, we're going to operate as if we were a public company. So we implemented all the disciplines that a public company has. So quarterly reporting, quarterly financial performance, quarterly reporting, just all that kind of stuff. Then as it turned out, after Y2K, you had the dot-com crisis. So that slowed everything down a bit. So by the time we went public, we'd been practicing it and operating it for 4 or 5 years. And we had those disciplines down. And part of the reason we were oversubscribed 3 times in our offering was that we were able to communicate the investment advantage of being a business that had a deeply entrenched operational culture. And it showed up in key metrics like our retention. We measured retention, other people measured attrition, but our retention was 91, 92%, whereas in the industry, attritions ran 18 to 25%. People would move so much. That was a big value. And this was at a time when we were more or less doubling our staff every year, which is pretty easy when you're going from 100 to 200 or 200 to 400, 400 to 800, but you start going 800 to 16, 16 to 32, 32 to 64. You don't do that unless you've got really good culture processes and programs, orientation programs, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the most important things I did was I would travel around to every location twice a year and do town meetings. And we'd limit the size of the town meeting to a couple of hundred. So like when I was in India, I might do 4 a day in the one location because, we'd have, say, 1,000, 1,500 people in a center. And that gave me a chance to be in front of everybody, to work on whatever it was I was working on with them at the time, but always some cultural dimension, some business dimension. to give out awards, and the most important award in our organization was what was called the Star Award, which was a peer selected award for who in the organization most embodied the culture. And they got a nice big star that sat on their desk, and they got a little bit of money that enabled them to take out their family to a restaurant to dinner. So, it was not financially a big deal, but it was a huge honor to be to get this from me as a symbol of the leadership of the company. And then, of course, I'd spend time, these were like 2-hour events, which I'd talk. Some people said I talk too much, but, occupational hazard. I'd do a lot of Q&A. Anybody could ask me questions. And then I'd just hang with people and find out, who'd gotten married, who had a baby, who did this, who did that. And I was well coached, because half the time I still can't remember names and things like that. But, but these were very important. That was a very important component of our culture process in the midst of many, many others that certainly didn't depend on me in the slightest.
One of the interesting things that my coach said to me after nearly 20 years running SYC, and I had lots of friends there that I'd made during that time, and people I had come up through the organisation. But one of the things that my coach said to do when I left was, he said, now go talk to them and ask them what it is that you did that enhanced their career, and what are the things you did that didn't always help, because my intention was always to help, but whether the effect was what I intended. And I said, well, why would I go do that? I finished there now, and the people that I still speak to are my friends. And he said, because I'll tell you the truth now. Because it's not the boss having a conversation, it's Paul having a conversation. And some of the most valuable insights and feedback I got from the things that they said I did for them. So I didn't do that for you. You did that for yourself. I just created an environment that allowed you to do it. And the things that I thought in my mind were the most additive, they said, oh, we just amused you with that, because, you'd sit in the staff kitchen and think that you were actually talking to the receptionist, but the word was out that Paul's sitting in the kitchen, so send the new guys. And it was just, but it was such that this idea of culture, and one of the things that we've discussed as well is within culture, and you've talked about challenging and respecting the individual and those sort of things. A word that I used around SYC was around that I loved this work, and I loved the people that I worked with. It meant that it made it tolerable on the days where I didn't like it, or there were tough things to do, or bad things had happened and we had to do it, but I still loved it. But a bit like values, I think the word love in an organisation and in an organisational context starts making people feel squeamish. But I think if you unpack what that means around commitment, respect, keeping your word, delivering when it's hard, tolerating mistakes, judging people fairly, all of those different things are elements of culture and elements of humanity that I think is a theme all the way through that is translatable in community, and you've then translated it into huge business success, but is often missing. People look at, I think in terms of the value equation, people look at the dollars, and you think the dollars just fall out. If you create value and people buy into that value and you deliver value, the money just falls out. But people look at that as the scorecard. But I haven't once heard that be your scorecard.
No, and actually, I really think your insight about asking people afterwards is a great one, and I didn't do that, and I now wish I had. I mean, it's a very good thing. I did try and encourage people to give feedback, and I always understood it was going to be muted. But like when we had an open plan system, before that was very popular. I ended up, when we went public, having an office, but it was all glass and the door was always open, but there was occasionally when you had to be able to make phone calls that people couldn't hear. But when people would come to see me and say, well, I really like what you did there, I would very often say, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. But tell me something that you think I didn't do so well at. What would you have done differently? Or how would you have said something that challenged me a bit? And people would, and certainly around our global leadership team, we had a leadership team of between 7 and 10. It varied. And we saw ourselves operating as a global leadership team, and I was the first among equals, but we were equal. And we structured our compensation and so on, but particularly our incentive compensation was structured so it was an all for or none process. And the creation of that team encouraged a lot of pretty open and sometimes brutal feedback. And I was challenged on two things that seemed somewhat contradictory a lot. One was that I wouldn't move quickly enough on making some personnel changes.
Yeah,
I was challenged that I was giving people too many, too long.
Yep, and
in many cases they were right. I was also challenged that I kept changing things up too much. One of the things I kind of said was my experience of the organizations I'd been part of over the years was that after 2 or 3 years you get lazy, you get into a pattern, and you got to shake it up. And so my job as CEO was I had to respond to God's shake up. So the .com crisis and having a week where we lost $8 million of receivables because the companies that owed us the money went broke.
Yeah.
And we'd never not received anything. That was a good crisis that was out of my control.
Yeah.
But if God was a bit lazy and hadn't given us a crisis, every 30 to 36 months, my job as the CEO was to invent one and blow the business up and reinvent it. And we had different organizational structures, and we would move people around to different leadership roles and so on to create change. And that kept the organization honest, and it led to a lot of very blunt and open conversations.
Yeah.
And with my CFO, for instance, we would have knockdown dragouts because, I was a risk taker and he was the very opposite. And we'd have these knockdown dragouts, but when we were ever outside my office, we spoke with one voice. We agreed on what the decision was, and we both owned it.
So massively powerful thing there again from Raymond in terms of, and we've talked about this with in our other podcasts, but also in conversations with organisations, and this idea of Raymond constantly upending the tyranny of success, the list of this is the way we do things around here because this is the way we've done things, and the second comes up again in Raymond's conversation just then around challenge. Mm-hmm. This idea that in every organisation that's successful, that lives for longer than a couple of years, starts to experience what's known as the ambidextrous challenge, of inertia and routine and system and process and innovation become increasingly estranged buddies.
Yeah.
And lots of consultants will then draw a 4X box and say that but actually it's not a 4X box. They actually come apart, and where success lives is the managing the challenge, managing the tension, holding that tension. And if you can hold that tension ferociously and fiercely, but respectfully keep it together, which is, I think, what Raymond just mentioned. I think it's just undervalued and under-revealed in conversations because everything has to be logical.
I think it's a beautifully articulated insight. No, that's really helpful. And you're quite right. It's particularly in software development, and we were writing very critical, complex software, particularly for the consumer finance industry. At one point, the software that we were supporting and had partially written was running 75% of all the credit card transactions in the world. And
amazing.
So it's got to work, right?
Yeah.
And so, how do you know it's going to work? Well, you have a software development methodology. You are CMM level 5 certified. You've got ISO processes. You've got testing processes. You've got all these processes that, are repeated and consistent and so on. So it's, that stability is really critical.
Yeah.
And yet on the other hand, you've got to continuously innovate.
Yeah.
And so that when the software development nexus moved from mainframe to front-end systems and PCs and user interfaces and so on, if you did all that stuff, you'd never get anything done. It was, get it in, try it out, throw it out, do it again.
Yeah.
And you had to create a culture that both of these things could coexist in, because we had probably 3/4 of our staff working on the large core systems, and we had the other quarter working on new front end, and now artificial intelligence and all that kind of systems. Not back then, it was other things, but just as innovative. And these all had to live together. And you also had to manage the flavor of the month club.
Yeah.
So in software, if you go back to the 2000s, SAP became the ERP system.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, anyone who knew SAP was paid 3 times what a really good programmer was paid over here. And how do you manage this within a company where you want to move people from here to here and train them, but then you're putting them in a position where you got to pay them 3 times as much at the expense of these people? And so we had to work out culturally, how do we do that? And so we, rather than changing our base layers, we said, okay, everybody's on the same base layer, but if you're working on SAP for this period, then you get an add-on. And if you come off of SAP and go somewhere else, then you lose that add-on, and so on. So people moved in and out. And you've always got to be malleable, right?
Yeah.
Because the world doesn't stand still, particularly in technology.
So for all of those TikTok and short reels and Instagram videos where you've got this endless procession of influencers saying, if you follow this system, you'll be successful. Spend some time listening to someone like Raymond, who's just sort of said that's half the story, and it's possibly the easy part of the story. The systems, building systems, and keeping people within systems is actually the easy part. The hard part is behaviours. The hard part is culture, and the hard part is handling tension. So it's fierce, dissatisfied, but not dysfunctional, because it wants to be excellent. So those who it's easy to follow the systems. It's hard to manage the humans, but the real success happens in the
both.
humans.
But it's both.
And both, of course, the combination of the
both.
two.
Yeah, because you can't run a software company where everybody's doing their own thing and being creative.
All over the place.
You can do that, but you won't make any money.
Well, there are lots of them doing that and not making any money. We're running out of. We've run out of time, and there's so much more still to uncover. The parts that we haven't uncovered, of course, is your sale and return to Australia. But perhaps we'll. I think it goes without saying, if you're happy, Raymond, we'd like to invite you back, and because I think we've got another half of a story here to pick up and share, if you're happy to share it. But we've run out of time for today.
Well, I'd be honoured to, but
excellent. All right,
thank you.
We'll book it.
Oh, that would be great, Raymond, because I feel like we've only just scraped the surface of really learning more about what makes a great CEO, all your lessons that you've learned. It just
we'll definitely have to wrap that up, because we're going to leave everybody hanging now. But the final question I ask everybody, and Raymond's going to get 2 bites at this because we will book him back in. But on your bad day, we ask everybody this: on your bad day, when you're in a bad mood, and you're driving home in that bad mood, but some music comes on, something either comes on the radio, you put it on. What's the music that would get you out of a bad mood, even if you want to stay in it?
Well, in my car, I listen to classical music because I find it's, I don't want to listen to talkback radio. Although if the Crows have had a good week, I might listen to a little bit just for the heck of it. Yeah. But so it's, yes, I listen to classical music. I suppose it's so hard to pick because there's so many different things coming down this morning. I heard this beautiful piano piece by an Australian composer. But I suppose if I had to pick one, it'd be Beethoven's Fifth, bum, 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 bum. Yeah. Bum, 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 bum. I mean, that'll get you going. Yeah. That gets me.
Absolutely.
Get me out of my doldrums.
That gets everyone out of their doldrums. Fantastic. Raymond, thank you so much for sharing half your story with us today. It was an honor. And we'll have to book you in again for the other half, our return to Australia, our sail and our return to Australia. Yeah. So stay tuned for that. Coming back. We'll leave you hanging for the rest of it now. Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you, Raymond.
As you've heard, we've invited Raymond back, so stay tuned to hear the next stage of his story.